Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 12th Annual Sternberg Family Lecture in Public Scholarship. This year's topic could not be more timely: courageous leadership in trying times. For those who don't know, I'm Mark Osfield, Dean of the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. We are the School of Social Sciences here at City College and home to most of the college's public service and leadership programs. Each year, the Sternberg Family Lecture brings to campus leaders who tackle some of the most urgent challenges of our time, from public health and climate change to immigration and AI. I want to particularly thank Cy and Lori Sternberg for their generosity and vision in making this series possible. Today, we are honored to welcome New York's 67th Attorney General, Letitia James. Attorney General James has built her career fighting for fairness, accountability, and rule of law. She's a trailblazer, first woman of color elected to citywide office as public advocate, and the first to hold statewide office as Attorney General. She now leads one of the nation's most important law enforcement bodies, dedicated to protecting New Yorkers' rights and safety. Following her remarks, we will continue the conversation with a panel of Colin Powell School faculty. Please join me in welcoming New York State Attorney General Letitia James.
Thank you. You're so quiet. I usually teach at Columbia, and sometimes I teach at CUNY downtown. And my students are a little bit more rowdy. So it's great to be here. And thank you, Dean, for that wonderful and gracious introduction. I'm a proud alumni from Lehman College. Anyone? Lehman College? Yay. Okay, forget it. So it means a lot to me to be asked to deliver the 12th annual Sternberg Family Lecture in Public Scholarship. And I am grateful to be here today with so many students and with others who are dedicated to civil rights and to equal justice. We all believe that we must work together across our differences to create a fairer and more democratic world. And so I really want to thank the faculty and the staff of City College of New York and the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership for this opportunity. But more importantly, I want to thank you for helping civil society grow by hosting events like this. And for all of the students here, are you here because it's required? No? Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So let me apologize. I've been in the paper a lot, and I'm in the newspaper again today. And the lesson is this: if you go up against powerful interest, if you speak truth to power, if you stand up for the least of God's children, if you recognize that you're in the right, and if right is on your side, even if you have to sometimes stand alone, you're going to piss off a lot of people. And it's okay. Because as long as you do the right thing in your heart, and as long as you recognize that you're standing up for those who are invisible, those who are unheard, those who are locked out of the sunshine of opportunity, those who are oftentimes not at the table of power, then you must be making a difference. You must be doing something right. Particularly when you shake up individuals, you must be doing something right. And even if you have to stand alone, never be afraid. Know that there are countless number of individuals out there who are on your side. Countless number of individuals who are encouraging you. Countless number of nameless, faceless people who you'll see each and every day, who will say to you, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank, of course, the president of City College, Dr. Vincent Brudeau, Mark Osfield, of course, the dean, and my very good friend, the commissioner, David Chosky, the Sternberg Family Professor of Leadership. He is brilliant. He always has been brilliant. I always look forward to his leadership. And of course, the great Cy and Lori Sternberg. Thank you so much for making this lecture possible. And thank you for your commitment to encouraging important conversations about public issues and leadership as the current administration in Washington pushes back against the progress of the civil rights movement. I am of one AG. There are 50 AGs all across this nation. We have a number of organizations. There are 24 Democratic AGs. The rest are Republican. We have one who is independent. And we get together and we focus on issues. Right now, I am on trial, and it's a bipartisan approach. How many of you have gone to concerts and you complain about the tickets of concerts? Right? We're on trial against Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Why? Because of the monopoly that they hold, and because they have own a lot of venues all across the nation, and they determine the price of your tickets. And because of the monopoly, because of this power, this stranglehold, we believe that it should be challenged. We believe that they're in violation of the law. And so we're on trial with regards to Ticketmaster, and I think we will be successful. My colleague in New Mexico was on trial just the other day with respect to Meta. Why? Because they believe that Meta's product, unfortunately, has engaged in too many children, particularly too many children, are addicted to these algorithms. And as a result of that, a number of children have engaged in harm. And some of the parents who lost children as a result of AI and as a result of these dangerous algorithms went to my colleague in New Mexico, and he brought a lawsuit and he was successful. And other attorneys general, including myself, we also have actions against Meta as well. We want to hold them accountable for the behavior and because of their product, and because they were aware of the harmful nature of this product and how they targeted children. So it's important that you understand a little bit about what AGs do, bipartisan AGs do. And, we also, my office filed the most comprehensive and extensive lawsuit against opioid manufacturers and distributors for the dangers that it caused to Americans as a whole. And we were successful in getting billions of dollars for mitigation, for beds, for education, and for individuals who unfortunately are addicted to opioids. These are the types of things that AGs do each and every day. We also, sometimes we go our separate ways. And right now, Democratic attorneys general are responding, of course, to the retreat of the federal government and responding to all of the, I would argue, illegal, unconstitutional executive orders which do not have the force of law. And as of right now, New York has filed over 50 some odd cases against the federal government because they have basically retreated. And now it's up to states to step in the gap, from environmental laws to voting rights to immigration to consumer protection to reproductive rights. The list goes on and on and on, to Medicaid, to food stamps. All of these issues and more, to the protections against the LGBTQI community, to attacks on DEI diversity, to attacks even on some of our universities. And so it's important that all of you understand that the reason why we have decided to step up is not because of any animus towards any particular individual. It's because we have a commitment to the rule of law and to the Constitution. And we made a promise to all of our constituents to keep you from harm and to hold you harmless. And so, for instance, the Gateway Tunnel, which is a tunnel that connects New York to New Jersey, 1,000 jobs, union jobs, good middle-class jobs. This administration wanted to shut down the funding, billions and billions of dollars. The extension of the Second Avenue subway, this administration wanted to shut it down. Congestion pricing, this administration wanted to shut it down. And so as the Democratic Attorney General of the great state of New York, I have a duty and a responsibility to ensure that all of these projects continue and that we do not lose funding. And most importantly, that when they say to New York and other states, hey, we want all of your data. We want your voting data for every single individual who has voted. We want data of everyone who receives food stamps. We want data from everyone who is on Medicaid. We want all of your data. My position is no. because I have to protect your personal data. So if you ask, I guess I started out by telling you what I do. I'm also the attorney for the governor and for all state agencies. And I represent the interests of the state. And so whenever anyone challenges a law in the state of New York arguing that it's unconstitutional, it is my job to defend the constitutionality of a particular bill. In addition to that, we do affirmative litigation. I sue a lot of landlords, bad landlords. Some landlords are really good, but there are really a lot of bad landlords. So if there are conditions in certain buildings where tenants live, and the conditions obviously threaten health and safety, I have a responsibility and a duty to file action against those landlords to correct the conditions. We also, again, have a special office called OSI, the Office of Special Investigations. Whenever there is a death as a result of police interaction, we have a responsibility and a duty to investigate that death. And so we have been investigating a number of cases in regards to individuals who unfortunately have lost their life. But I'm here today because we need to support and encourage courageous leadership, especially in times like this. Again, speaking truth to power, despite and recognizing that when truth is crushed to the ground, truth eventually rises back up. And I was never more aware of this until recently when I had the honor of visiting Selma, Alabama. It was the Selma Jubilee. It's when individuals in the civil rights movement and our allies, we march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge in honor of the courage and sacrifice of all of those who led the civil rights movement. And these were people who were ready to risk their lives 61 years ago on Bloody Sunday so that future generations could have the freedom that had been denied for so long. And it's important that you understand what happened in Selma is now happening these days. As I see and talk to too many immigrants right now whose rights are being violated, whose homes are being invaded without judicial warrants, individuals who are being detained, individuals right now who are afraid to go to school, afraid to go to their house of worship, afraid to even come outside. It's important that you and all of us in this room recognize what is at risk, and my friends, everything is at risk, and particularly the freedoms of immigrants right now. And it's similar to what was experienced 61 years ago on Bloody Sunday when individuals marched for the freedoms of African Americans. As I listened to veterans of those civil rights battles in Selma, they talked about their experiences and the challenges they faced and overcame through their faith, their persistence, and organizing. And I was struck not by the similarities between this discriminatory racism of the 1960s and the echoes today, but also by their unwavering belief that their cause was just, and that faith and fear can never share the same space. And it was their faith that motivated all of them to rise up, and how that belief gave ordinary Americans the courage to stand up to state-sponsored violence, federal indifference, and local acts of terror. It sounds familiar? Their persistence and eventual victory were made possible by what I often refer to as the courageous leadership in trying times. We know about the heroics of well-known national civil rights leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King and Ralph Abernathy and Dr. Joseph Lowery and John Lewis and others. But you do not need to be in the spotlight to show courage or leadership. In fact, some of the most courageous individuals that I have ever met in my career are people whose names you do not know, who are not in the history books. Nameless, faceless individuals who struggle each and every day. Struggle for freedom, struggle for the rights of others, struggle for reasonable housing, struggle to make sure people vote, struggle for environmental rights, struggle for health care, struggle for immigrants, struggle for the LGBTQI community. Each and every day as I travel this state, and in some cases as I travel this nation, I meet so many individuals who I'm incredibly proud of, whose names are not in the history books. But they struggle nonetheless because they know people are hurting, particularly right now. I got my start as a public defender. I met so many of these leaders at tenant associations, at public housing, who fought fiercely for their neighbors' right to safe housing. They and so many others are the courageous leaders that inspired me to fight for the voiceless. And as we sit here today talking about leadership, it is those leaders that I encourage all of you to emulate. Those who lead not for glory, but for purpose. Those who lead because they must, because they feel no one else is standing up for their rights. If you ever visit Selma and talk to the locals about the heroes of the Bloody Sunday March, you of course will hear about John Lewis and Dr. King, but you will also hear names like the Courageous Eight, this local group from the Dallas County Voters League. They invited Dr. King and SCLC to Selma to join the fight for their right to vote. It included Reverend Frederick Reese, president of that organization, who led the Teachers March, or Amelia Boynton Robinson, a key figure in the local movement, whose photograph was seen around the world after she was tear gassed and beaten on Bloody Sunday. Sounds familiar? Marie Foster, she's called the mother of the voting rights movement. She taught literacy classes and marched at the front on Bloody Sunday. Or Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was famous. He was a deacon whose death was as a result of simply marching for voting rights. And he was beaten and he was shot by state troopers. Anne Bland, who was only 11 years old at the time, and she marched in all 3 Selma marches and was amongst the youngest activists jailed for her activities. Betty Mae Fikes, known as the Voice of Selma. She was a young singer whose protest songs were inspired the marchers. The Reverend James Bevel, who played a vital role in organizing the march. These local leaders risked their lives for others. Though most of them you may have never heard their names or learned about them in history classes, these are the individuals who stood up for others. And yet these hometown heroes were essential to the civil rights movement's success, to the growth of democracy in America, and the freedom that you and I enjoy each and every day that we oftentimes take for granted. They truly embodied what it means to show courageous leadership in trying times. And as we remember their courage and their stories and the fight for civil rights and human rights and racial justice continues on to this day. The work isn't easy, my friends. And as I said at the outset, sometimes you'll stand alone, sometimes you'll march alone, and sometimes you'll be targeted. But at the end of the day, remember that you're marching for someone else, and that the best that you can do is think about others before you think about yourselves. I know it takes patience, it takes courage and determination, but it's up to all of us who have been the beneficiaries of all of them to carry their legacy forward and to always look forward. I'm proud to stand here with you side by side to carry on that legacy. The challenges are big, but so are the civil rights champions, both past and present. And so I urge all of you to make sure that you stand up for the rights of others, that you recognize what is at risk right now. Let us protect the basic right to vote, which is at risk right now. There is a bill that is pending in Congress called the SAVE Act, the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act. There's this notion that they want individuals basically to have identification to vote, but that bill is so much more than that. That bill is nothing more than an attempt to suppress the right to vote, to restrict the right to vote. Because at the end of the day, they cannot sell their policies. And so the only way to win is to limit the franchise. But we have an opportunity, my friends, to stand up and to be recognized because our vote is our voice. And so I urge all of you to make sure you protect the basic right to vote, that you expand the franchise and not restrict it. And I urge all of you, and I hope to see all of you this Saturday as we march. As we march this Saturday in honor of, the 13 soldiers who unfortunately died on foreign soil. That you march this Saturday in honor of Renee Good and Alex Priddy, who died in Minnesota. That you march on behalf of immigrants right now whose families are being torn apart and who currently right now are being detained. I urge all of you to march this Saturday on behalf of the LGBTQ community. I urge all of you to march on behalf of your rights and the Constitution and the rule of law. I urge all of you to march for a more perfect union. And I urge all of you to march for our democracy and our freedom and our liberty, which is at stake. So I hope that you will join us. And I hope that you will march arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, with no space between us. Black, white, Latino, Asian, everyone, as we all stand up for justice wherever you are. It is because of that courageous leadership we can shape the future that we want. And we can do it all together with one voice. Let's do that. It's an honor and a privilege to be with all of you this afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to say these words. You're a very polite audience. I'm not used to polite audience. I'm used, and I thank you. Merch.
Thank you for those powerful and rousing remarks for the 12th Annual Sternberg Family Lecture in Public Scholarship. Let's give it up for the Attorney General. I have just a brief thank you on behalf of City College and the Colin Powell School and the Sternbergs, of course. And this is what I wanted to say to you. We know you as Madam Attorney General, and I've been lucky to get to know you a little bit as Tish. And the thing that strikes me about you is that those are one and the same. Your conviction, your passion, who you are embodies the way that you serve. And I think that is such a powerful example, especially for the students who are gathered here today. So thank you for your example. And yes, we have some merch. We are aware that you are an alumna of another CUNY college. And so therefore, is the photographer here? I need to make sure we get a photo. Okay.
Oh, this is nice.
This is on behalf of City College and
Oh,
the
my
Colin
goodness.
Powell School.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we know you're on a tight schedule, but we do want to get one photo, and so I'd like to invite Cy and Lori, please, President Boudreau, Dean Ostfield, please join the Attorney General for a photograph.
Yes, just here.
I'm positive.
Bring you along. All right, 1, 2, 3. Let's get smiles. Everybody make them smile. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Before I leave, if anyone's interested in internships or going to law school,
Take her up on it. Thank you so much. As the Attorney General leaves, I want to invite our distinguished panelists. Please join me on the stage here. Rick Stengel, Dirk Moses, Laura Lee Salas.
Hey, Dave. How are you?
So nice to meet
Good to see you. Okay.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. Before I dive in, allow me to just briefly introduce each of you to the audience, and then I hope to have a rich and dynamic conversation, which should be easy with the three of you. So first, to my far left is Richard Stengel, who goes by Rick, I believe, who is a renowned editor, writer, and political consultant. He served as president and CEO of the National Constitution Center and was the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs from 2013 to 2016. Before his government service, Stengel was the managing editor of Time magazine for 7 years, and he's also the author of multiple books, including a best-selling collaboration with Nelson Mandela, called Mandela's Way, 15 Lessons on Life, Love, and Courage. And we're very lucky to have Rick joining us here at the Colin Powell School
Thank you,
as a
Dave.
leader in residence. Next is, you'll always be commissioner to me, Commissioner Laura Lee Salas, who is an attorney and distinguished expert in labor law and workers' rights. She previously served as commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, known as DCWP. In this role, she championed legislation and enforcement that expanded protections for workers and consumers, focusing on issues like paid sick leave and fair work practices. You have such a strong background in public service that is an inspiration, and you're a dedicated advocate for equity and social justice, and that's why we're also lucky to have you here as a leader in residence at the Colin Powell School. And last but not least is Professor Dirk Moses. Dirk is a prominent historian and professor specializing in genocide, colonialism, and political violence. He currently serves as Spitzer Professor of International Relations here at the City College of New York, where his research critically examines the relationship between liberalism, empire, and mass violence. Professor Moses is known for his influential work, The Problems of Genocide, Permanent Security, and the Language of Power, which challenges traditional understandings of genocide and offers new frameworks for analysis. Thank you so much to each of you for joining us. You each have a different facet of the theme that we'll be exploring over the next few minutes, which is courageous leadership in trying times. But before we delve into your unique vantage points, I wanted to invite each of you to reflect on what we have heard from the Attorney General just now. Such powerful remarks. As you think a little bit, I'll just share some of the things that stood out to me. She talked about standing up for the least of God's children, even if you have to stand alone. When she was talking about protecting our data, she was very plain spoken. She said, quote unquote, "My position is no." Mm-hmm. Clarity. And she said, when talking about that experience she had in Selma, when truth is crushed to the ground, truth has a way of standing back up. I could go on, but allow me to pass the mic, and maybe, Rick, you can get us started.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Dave, for having me. Thank you, Sternberg. It's great to be here. I see a couple of my students, so I'm giving them a shout out. I actually think the thing that was so extraordinary about her today was how John F. Kennedy described courage as grace under pressure. I'm in the news business, so I know she had 2 criminal referrals against her this morning by the Trump administration. That's not a fun place to be. Did she mention it? Did she show any concern about it? No, what she showed was grace under pressure. And that's what you want in your Attorney General. But I also thought the other thing that I found so powerful, and this is also true of Nelson Mandela, who we'll talk about too, is that she wasn't a grandstander. She wasn't saying, I'm this courageous person. That courage is something that is demonstrated by people, by individuals, by everybody in ways that we never even know about, and that people don't advertise. And that is the important thing, particularly in a democracy where everybody has to stand up for each other. And so I think that idea of community was something that she talked about that was very powerful.
Thank you so much. Laura Lee.
Yeah, I think so. She's wonderful and obviously displayed a lot of grace, and I'm in awe of her. And one of the things that I think makes her so an example to follow is that she is lifting up all these regular, everyday people who are leaders, extreme leaders, right? Who may not be known by everyone else, may not get the recognition or the credit, but she spent time here listing a number of people who no one knows, but who had contributed so much to the civil rights movement. And I think, to me, that is so translatable to today, right? And a good leader recognizes leadership in others. So I think that's what I take from her remarks. Yes.
Yeah, she talked about the courageous 8, as you're saying. The story that will stick with me, that I will share with my own daughters, when I see them this evening, is that of Anne Bland, who at the age of 11 joined the civil rights movement and was jailed as a result of it. So yes, it was those stories that she lifted up. Dirk.
Great to be here, an honor and privilege, in fact. What struck me as an observer, an outsider to this political culture, is that we had a prominent and inspiring speaker talking about events sort of around 50 years ago, 60 years ago, in fact, where the leadership energy is on the outside. It's against the state, because the state is racist, at least down there where Selma is located. And leadership and the struggle for justice was outside the system of power. But now, she's in government, right? So now the people struggling on the outside are on the inside. And of course, that's occurred in the meantime. It struck me, though, that leadership, to draw a lesson from this, has different modalities. And one of them is, in addition to being an activist, is being a political leader that wins elections, which is a slightly different political logic. It's not fighting just for one cause, it's uniting different causes into a broad coalition and getting the majority of the population to vote for you, to come out on the day. We have compulsory elections, voting in Australia. You don't here. So you need to get people out, not just to agree with you. Obama was a master at that. Clinton was earlier in his career as well. And that is a challenge, in addition to the single issue activist one.
Thank you so much. Those are rich reflections. I'm impressed not just by the insight, but also that you each were so succinct. So we're going to get into some great conversation here. Let's keep that up. So I want to ask each of you to reflect on one more question before we delve into some of your more specific work. Can each of you give an example of courageous leadership, either that you have borne witness to or lessons that you learned while leading during times of change or crisis? And Commissioner Salas, I'll start with you, since we shared a bit of time working in crisis
Certainly.
together.
Yes, thinking back to the pandemic, a lot of our meetings were online because we were all home at the time, right? And I'm thinking immediately of a couple of things. One of them was during COVID. And I say this because I'm very proud of the people that work with me at the agency, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. And I remember this inspector in particular. His name is David Raja. And I will never forget him, because when everyone was like running to hide at home, worried about the virus and not knowing, we didn't know what it was. It was February, maybe early March. No one knew yet what it meant and how to protect themselves. And we had to published a rule in my office to protect consumers from price gouging. But all our staff were being sent home. And here we are with this mandate, with this need to go out and inspect for compliance with the rule. And you had to rely on people to volunteer, basically, to do the work, right? Because everyone wanted to protect themselves and their families. And David went out in the field to inspect businesses to make sure that people could buy face masks for the $20 that they were always sold, as opposed to $200, $300, which was outside of anyone's ability to get. So there are people like that who every day are displaying heroism, right? It's not just being someone who is doing their jobs well. He's going out of his way to do something because he believes that that's on him. It's on him. He takes the responsibility to do that. But also what is happening right now in cities like Chicago, New York, DC. I have a friend who lives in DC who, in her neighborhood, the parents have organized to take kids to and from school whose parents may be undocumented, to make sure that they're not exposed to ICE enforcement. And this is a very organic kind of leadership, right? No one is out there like giving instructions. They got together and they said, we can do this. We can each take 10, 15 kids and bring them back in home safely. And do that to protect our communities. And it's the kind of leadership that A.G. James was talking about. They were not doing it for themselves, but they were doing it for others in their community. So it's very similar to what happened 60 years ago.
Yeah, I love that connection of everyday heroism in times of crisis. Dirk, what comes to mind for you, an example of courageous leadership?
You know, I don't have the kind of leadership experience that my co-panelists have, but I can share an anecdote from my working with a leader. My first job after college, a long time ago now, was in the office of the cabinet in the Queensland government. And the head of the office of the cabinet was a very young Kevin Rudd, who was until recently the Australian ambassador to the US, and before that, the Prime Minister of Australia. You could tell he was on an upward trajectory already then, and he was in his early 30s. I was then in my early 20s. And the first thing he said to me, because I was obviously quite chuffed that I'd gotten the job and was perhaps demonstrating that, he said, be a quiet achiever, and because we've both grown up in Church of England families, Anglican you would say, or Episcopal you would say here, he used a biblical quote. He said, you shall be known by your works. You don't need to make a big noise, just get on with your job and do a good job and people will notice. That stuck with me, though when you see TV shows like House of Cards, and when you talk to friends who worked in the State Department, and I have some, or other big bureaucracies, they go, no, Dirk, that's bad advice because people steal your ideas and then take credit for it and advance their careers. So I'm addressing these comments to students in the room about, balance these things up. But unfortunately, there is in real life work environments, there are inspiring moments and also less inspiring moments.
Well, speaking of someone who worked in the State Department, Rick, over to you.
Well, we'll ask Mark for profiles in courage in the
Yeah.
department. So I did work with Nelson Mandela. I worked with Nelson Mandela on his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. And we spent many, 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 many hours together. It was the last thing in the world he should have been doing. The country was on the eve of a potential civil war. He was running for president. He was writing a constitution. So around Christmas, I went down to his house in the Transky. And we were going to have breakfast and then have our conversation, taped conversations that would be the basis of the book. He's waiting for breakfast. He's a little bit testy. And the phone rings. Housekeeper says, Mediva, it's for you. He picks up the phone. He's listening. His face really starts to frown. And he says, okay. And he hangs up the phone. He had to go outside at that point to shake hands with this local rugby team, and he just walked outside very slowly to do that. Miriam came in and she said, Chris Hani has been shot. Chris Hani was the most popular leader in the ANC. Vince knows about South African history. This was the very thing that people thought would tip the country into civil war. He didn't react. He came back in, he shook hands with everybody. He made one or two phone calls, and then that night he went. This is an opposition leader. He wasn't president of South Africa. He went and addressed the nation about why this shouldn't tip the country in civil war. He never raised his voice. He never moved quickly. He's always defined courage as being measured and having self-control, which is something we don't see much of now in our present state. But it was just extraordinary to witness a real profile in courage in real time.
Wow, what a story. What a
Yeah.
story. It reminds me of one of Colin Powell's leadership lessons, which was never let him see you sweat. But that is far easier said than done when you are confronted with those circumstances. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's get into some more of your respective work. Rick, you've led the fight against disinformation. I'd like to hear a little bit about that. And Dirk, you study how historical truth is contested. We live in this polarized era where it feels like maybe it's not enough for us to be right, and we actually have to be much more deliberate in how we're thinking about communicating truth so it actually reaches and resonates with a skeptical public. So I wanted to invite both of you to comment on that. Maybe Rick, you can start.
Dirk, you start.
Okay, I'm in the hot seat. So I got this question from a journalist a few months ago from the BBC, was doing a television show report about reports they'd heard of AI fakes, deep fakes of Auschwitz inmates playing the violin, musical instruments, in the course of extermination and so forth. Wow. And this had become a scandal. And he wanted to interview me about that as a historian of mass violence. Now, I'm not an historian or expert on new technologies and so forth, but I did a quick bone up online after I'd been sent the questions. And it struck me as all a little more complicated than he was making out. They wanted to turn this into like yes, no, black and white, truth, false scandal. And now clearly these, when you saw these images, you could tell that they were AI. They were little giveaways, right? But I said to him, in a couple of years, we won't be able to tell. The technology will be that good, right? But I said, we can't exhaust this issue by saying they're fakes and then that is the end of it. Because the fact is that we do have reports of the Nazis instrumentalizing Jewish and Roma inmates to play music to lighten the tone, so to speak, right? So maybe it's gesturing towards historical truth, for which there's no exact record. Right. And that's maybe what the creator of the AI imagery was trying to do. So we need to rethink truth in other ways. It's not just exact mimic copies of historical records, but there's an historical truth or a poetic truth and so forth.
Yeah, wow, that's very, very thought-provoking. Rick?
Yes, well, Dirk shows the complexity of this issue. So I wrote a book called Information Wars about, it's about a lot about the State Department and creating something called the Global Engagement Center, which combated disinformation from Russia and from ISIS. And I've spent a lot of time talking about mis and disinformation, and I've become much more reticent about how you fight it and combat it than I was before, in part because of the rise of AI, which can create even greater volumes of mis and disinformation at a snap than we've ever had before. And so, and part of the problem in combating disinformation, as psychologists and social scientists tell you, is that when you repeat it, you're repeating the disinformation to someone, and then you're helping embed it. And there's a social scientist who came up with this idea of the truth sandwich, that if you do want to rebut a piece of disinformation, you say something that's factual. That's the first role. Then in the center you put the actual mis and disinformation, and then you have a bun of truth on the other side. But I'm just much less sanguine about how we do that, and if people have ideas about how to do it, I would welcome that, because I don't think there's any evidence in all of human history that we've ever been able to change someone's mind about whether they think something is true or not. So.
Can I add something on that?
Please.
I mean, to sort of undercut what I said before, actually, and to underline what you're saying, some things are true and false. So what I'm seeing at the moment, but we don't have all the information, that's the problem, is on social media, there are those that claim that US bases in the Gulf countries have been heavily damaged by Iranian missiles, and there are those that say, no, there isn't actually damage. So it is either, who is right here? I'm not in a position to tell you, but there's a lot of cheerleading going on for both sides of this conflict, and we're in a sense at the mercy of people's invented facts.
But that, and again, this is very old, and I think actually maybe the smartest person writing about this idea was Hannah Arendt, who was writing about what happened in World War II, where she has a famous book called Everything is Possible and Nothing is True, that the disinformationists, what they want to do is disabuse you of the idea that there are empirical facts at all, that there is some truth to be known, and they're doing a very good job of that.
Well, I can't help but adding, because
Sorry?
I hope that doesn't mean our time is up. I can't help but adding from the
Sorry.
health perspective, misinformation and disinformation obviously have huge implications. We've seen it in the conversation about vaccination, for example. And the piece that came to mind as both of you were conversing about it is the notion that pre-bunking is more effective than debunking. As you were alluding to, Rick, confronting someone with the wrongness of something that they might believe is usually not effective in getting them to change that belief. But investing more of our energy to shape those beliefs in the first place, or so-called pre-bunking, particularly when we can anticipate that misinformation or disinformation is coming, has been shown to be more effective. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This next question is specifically for the students of mine who are in the room. I just want to shout them out: Mohani, Daniel, Anisha. If I'm missing anyone, you have heard me, talk so much in our course about moving beyond admiring the problem and getting into more practical solutions that can work in the real world. Laura Lee, obviously you've done this, to help protect workers on the front lines. And we're talking about, the Sternberg Family Lecture is about public scholarship and how that can intersect with the real world. So how do we shift energy into moving away from solely admiring the problem and into designing more practical solutions?
It's a huge question. So I'll tell you what I've seen a lot throughout my career in government, and there are actually people do come up with a lot of solutions. You have really interesting policy solutions that would address problems all over the place. You can come up with a lot of them. For me, the issue is that how do you take that great policy idea and implement it? That is where we get stuck a lot, right? And so I won't name sort of particular jobs, but being in one role where there are a lot of senior advisors with a lot of great ideas. But if there's no team assigned to actually put those ideas into place, and set up a plan and set deadlines and cheer people along, nothing happens. And so you go back to the issue of leadership again, right? Where, again, you can have a wealth of interesting proposals to do things like in New York City in particular. Let's fix all of the problems. Let's figure out how to fix this budget deficit. But in reality, you need people who actually can do things. And we sort of don't appreciate always the value in having people who are operators and implementers. And so I worry more about that part because I've seen that there's always a wealth of interesting potential solutions that sometimes are not very practical. They're not designed in a way that can be understood even by the people who are supposed to implement them. Yeah. And so I'll tell you, I had one really great example of a piece of legislation that the city council in New York worked on to address the issues of freelancers in New York who were not getting paid in time by the companies that owe them money. And they had put together this very complicated process of basically creating a new court system within the agency to resolve disputes. And we didn't have the money, nor the staff, and it didn't make any sense to recreate an entire judicial system inside the agency, right? And so having a collaboration, a very close collaboration between city council, the agency that is going to actually make this legislation real for people, and the people on the ground, the people who represent the groups that represent freelancers on the ground, who understand what the issues are, we were able to set up a piece of legislation and a law that required very little new staffing, and that actually had amazing outcomes for freelancers who were getting paid their money on time for the most part because the agency now had a role to make companies pay on time, but they didn't have to spend months and maybe years to create a whole new almost agency within the agency. And so I don't know that it's a perfect answer to your question, but to me, I focus much more on getting people in place, getting people ready, like you guys, when you are thinking about your next steps. We desperately need people who can do things, who can actually sit down and say, let's take this idea and translate it into real action.
Thank you. That's such a tangible example. Rick or Dirk, I welcome your comments as well, and feel free to push back on the premise of the question. Is this the right role for the academy in the first place, or how do you think about some of the trade-offs?
I'm going to hand this one to you, Rick.
No, I'd let you go because I forgot what the question was. So.
Let me recap briefly. Moving from admiring the problem to practical solutions that can work in the real world, but particularly connecting that to the theme of public scholarship.
So, by the way, do people have you heard this expression before? Admiring the problem. I remember hearing it for the first time in the Obama administration. Samantha Power said it to me, and I thought, that's a great expression, because people in government spend a lot of time talking about the problem, and the ratio of how much time you spend talking about the problem as opposed to getting to a solution, was pretty much tipped in the admiring the problem stage. One of the things that I found about being in government is that it's very slow moving. It's very bureaucratic. You don't discuss solutions as much as you should, and it's more reactive than anything else. And so I do think, and not to give a speech or editorialize, but I mean we do have some incredibly serious problems in our country, and we need to be thinking about solutions to affordability, solutions to immigration. Solutions to what's happening abroad, using military power in an unconstitutional way, and to kind of rethink so many of the things that we took for granted that in previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican, speaking of mis and disinformation, they were trying to basically do the closest approximation to the truth, as opposed to kind of creating a narrative, a political narrative that has nothing to do with the truth. I do think we need a kind of almost like a new constitutional convention to think about some of these very big ideas in a very, very practical way. And I think the party that does that will be the party that's successful in the future. Easy to say, but.
I don't really have much to add on that one, because it's not really a topic I work on, and I don't have the government experience that Laura Lee does. But you have lots of questions there, I see.
I do, although we're running a little bit short on time, so I want to give the students a heads up, because we're gonna open it up for questions from the audience in just a moment. So maybe I'll take the prerogative of asking the last question, from the moderator's perspective, and then Daniel will pass a mic around for anyone else who has a question. And I thought maybe, I'll just end by trying to connect it back to what the Attorney General spoke about with respect to courage. And I think we in this room, were sort of nourished in our conviction just by hearing her. Rick, as you said, the way that she has grace under pressure, even though her name has been in the papers, and she stands strong with respect to what it is that she is fighting for. And I wonder if maybe each of you can kind of take that a bit personally and talk about what the sources are, either that you have for courageous leadership or that you think students should look to for courageous leadership. Dirk, do you want to start?
Okay, I mean, the stakes are very low when it comes to me as an academic, because I'm not responsible for an academic or a government department or that both of you have had, for example, or that the Attorney General does. Nevertheless, we all have roles and occasionally leadership roles in our domain, and mine is an academic one. I run an academic journal and try to influence a field on the study of mass violence. And after many years of thinking about that particular issue, I wrote this book that you mentioned a few years ago, where it was a critique and history of the genocide concept. And I argued that it's actually been as mischievous as it has been as helpful in many ways, because the threshold for proving genocide is so high, so that mass violence that doesn't somehow approximate that or is hard to analogize with the archetype of what genocide is seen as less shocking and can be quickly trivialized. And I came to this conclusion in part by working with Indigenous Australians, students and colleagues at the University of Sydney, who felt crushed in a way by the genocide concept, because people said, well, That's not a genocide, what you experienced, although your people were decimated and you lost all your land. But also, for example, Tamil students. We had many in Australia. There are many people many from Sri Lanka who'd escaped the civil war there. And they felt that we need to make our experience gain the genocide label, win that label so we get recognition. And I was quite fascinated by the touching faith they had that if once it's recognized as genocide, then all their problems will be solved. They'll achieve self-determination and so forth. And also so their anguish and the fact that they felt that suffering was ignored. And I came to the conclusion that this talismanic status of the concept of genocide has as many problems as solutions. Now that interpretation made me many enemies in the academic world, because a lot of people are invested in this concept. That was in 2021. Then we had the year after Ukraine, and then to the end of 23 we had, of course, the Gaza situation, and that concept of genocide is catapulted into the journalistic world. I'm constantly being asked to do podcasts and interviews. And then people who are very critical of my work before that have now come to me and said, well, now we see what you were talking about. So I think if you really believe and can demonstrate empirically, it's not a matter of faith, you've got to be able to demonstrate things empirically, that your views hold water, then you should stick by them and then wait for people to catch up.
Thank you.
Even if you take a lot of hits along the way.
Yeah.
I would say that I think good leaders are not about a good leader can never make everyone happy, right? There's no way that is going to happen. And I think sticking to your values and being transparent about who you are and what you're looking for, that has helped me through several roles where I had, I don't know, from 4 staff members to 550 was the last job. And you have to be very humble because you often are in situations where you come in and you are going to be leading people who know more than you, right? And I think one piece of advice for me would be, if you're lucky enough, and I was, to work for people who were really strong leaders, you will learn a lot because the trick about being a good leader is really about helping others become the best leaders they can be, right? So when I worked for the city, I felt like once I had a super strong team of deputies under me, there was really very little for me left to do. And I guess maybe my philosophy for continuing to be inspired to do the work is really just about what's in it for others around me, right? And that's my style of leadership, and I think it's served me, it's helped me.
Thank you. Rick.
I think what was so powerful about the Attorney General's talk is about the unremembered acts of heroism and courage that have happened all throughout history. That Selma March, it wasn't just John Lewis getting knocked on the head, it's hundreds of people whose names we don't know. And so I'm teaching this class in Mandela and leadership now at the Colin Powell School, trying to start a Mandela Leadership Center. And we were actually talking yesterday about him saying that same thing, that in that struggle in South Africa, it was about the millions and millions of people who risked their lives and livelihoods to get out there and march, and sometimes lost their lives. And I do think, to bring it around to where we are at this moment in the Republic, I think of Louis Brandeis's, the great Supreme Court Justice, line that the highest office in a democracy is that of citizen. That means there's an obligation on all citizens to participate, and when they see something that isn't right or that is wrong, to register that. And I think that's what we need to see more of. We've seen a lot of it, but I think that's what she was talking about too.
Yeah, thank you. The through line from Selma, to South Africa, to our own city during the pandemic, and those acts of everyday heroism and the courage that they represent, I feel like is something that has really shown through. We have about 5 minutes left, so why don't we try to take a couple of questions? Maybe we'll give Sai the prerogative of the first question, and then we'll take a couple of student questions and ask the panelists to respond.
Now that I have a specialist and expert on genocide, I have to ask this question. I've generally felt that the term genocide through the press has been overused and not necessarily appropriately used. Could you help me and give your definition of what genocide is and what would be appropriate use of the word genocide?
We're taking rounds or do this now?
Why don't we handle that one? And
Yeah.
then I'll get a couple of student
Yeah.
questions.
The way I would answer that question is by, in a sense, questioning its premises, which is why is genocide considered the crime of crimes, which is the common term. Now, because it is, and because it was seen as the gold standard, if you like, it's inevitable that any group that's endured immense suffering, regardless of the context, will seek to use that currency, right? So the issue of appropriateness then is hard to adjudicate because I, as an academic, I don't want to play the godlike role, which is often addressed to me, to adjudicate, is that a genocide, is that not a genocide? And I, as an historian of these ideas, I ask, well, why do we even have this idea? Where did it come from? It was invented, during the Second World War by Raphael Lemkin. Humanity has existed for thousands of years without this concept of genocide. Quite well, in a way, because, there's been more mass killing in the 20th century than, before that. So, I did write a 500-page book about this, which I'll send you, and I'm not going to summarize it now. But I take it as a learning moment to ask, like, why is there a preoccupation with genocide? Why isn't crimes against humanity considered as bad? Though if anyone sees the new Nuremberg film, which has just come out on the Nuremberg trials, right? Remember, the main indictment there was crimes against peace, crime of aggression, which was being alleged against certain states in the world system right now, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, which was a metaphor for the persecution of Jews and other people by the Nazis. And genocide, although it existed at the time, was seen as an undercategory of war crimes, like Lemkin failed to get it as an indictment. In other words, the crime of crimes in the 1940s was a war of aggression, or crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity, not genocide. I mean, it changed in the next 60, 70 years. And it shows you that our understanding of criminality is culturally variable and can change. And I think we should talk about it more afterwards, by the way. So I'm reluctant to participate in an adjudication of right or wrong, yes or no. I mean, there's no doubt that at times vexatious uses of the term can be made. I mean, without doubt, or frivolous even. But they're pretty obvious most of the time, like an animal holocaust or something like. But people who are committed to animal rights will have recourse to that, or animal genocide, right? And if they feel very strongly about that, they're vegetarians or so forth. And I don't want to forbid them that, because people's moral intuitions are very personal and very intense, I've discovered. And I don't like to be a scholar who plays a chastising role. I'm very interested in why people think what they think, like as a scholar. That's so interesting. Why do you think that? And then sort of, get it out of them. Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's do this. We'll take 3 student questions and then closing statements from the panel before President Boudreau closes us out.
Hello, guys. My name is Nixon Fedrick. I am currently an economics major at CCNY, and I'm a first-year fellow, a part of the Powell Fellowship for Leadership and Public Service. I want to start off by saying thank you for sharing your remarks. Laurie, Dave, Nick, you guys shared some phenomenal points. And Dave, thank you for the awesome questions. I wanted to know, in regards to leadership, are there any traits or qualities you guys recommend young students like us develop, especially in these troubling times, these difficult times? What are some of the qualities that you've noticed in leaders that really help them to strive during turbulent times. Nick, I know you mentioned earlier how Nelson Mandela, during these difficult times of apartheid, he maintained this level of calmness during difficult situations. And Dave, you mentioned earlier how Colin Powell had this famous quote about how you never let them see you sweat. So I want to know, are there any other attributes you'd recommend young students like us develop to be phenomenal leaders?
Great question. Thank you. Let's hear from two more students.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm a Moynihan Fellow. I just wanted to go back to something Rick said before, that Nelson Mandela said courage is also about when to have restraint and when to have self-control. And I was just wondering if you guys could maybe talk more about how to discern between when we should act and when we should take those moments to reflect and wait for our time.
Thank you so much. So I'm sort of connecting both of what the Attorney General said about leaders that are not always in the spotlight, leaders that we don't always know about, and then that discussion about admiring the problem and finding practical solutions. I'm currently writing a paper on how we create space and community in the context of LGBTQ New Yorkers, and we know that this is only possible because of street leaders that both worked with government, influencing government, and created practical solutions in their own right. So in terms of leadership, how do you pull together government leadership in terms of slow-moving bureaucracy, but it has authority and resources, and grassroots movements, which are fast-moving, quick, active, but have less resources? Basically, how as leaders do we navigate the expectations and resources of different spaces to find solutions?
These are such terrific questions. Thanks to each of you. I'm sorry that I didn't do a good enough job as moderator to get to more of your questions, but we're going to give these as good of a treatment as we can. So allow me to recap for you guys. 3 questions. The first was about leadership traits. The second is about restraint and self-control as a leadership trait and when that should push us to act versus not. And then the third one is really trying to pull at this thread of the trade-offs between government leadership and grassroots leadership. So maybe each of you can give a brief response and closing statement, and I will just remind you that you did so well with respect to brevity in the first set of responses. So over to you, Rick.
Remember to be short. So the first 2 questions are similar and aligned, and Mandela did have this incredible self-mastery. We talk about this in the course, but he developed it through 27 years in prison. I would not wish that on even my worst enemy. Prison was a crucible that molded that person that came out. The man that went in was actually sort of more hot-headed. But he had a very simple definition of leadership, which was somebody who steps up, right? It's like step forward. I don't know if people saw the Barack Obama eulogy for Jesse Jackson. It was really lovely. But one of his refrains was, at every stage in his life, from when he was a young man to when he was an old man, Jesse always said, "Send me." And that is what Mandela would say is leadership. You say "Send me, I'll do it." And I think it can be that simple. You don't even have to have self-mastery. And the question about government, I think it betrays this larger problem that we have, which is that people feel distant from their government. They feel like the government doesn't intrude in their lives at all, and when it does, it's something bad. That's a problem in a republic, right? And that's one of the things that, I mentioned earlier that political parties should really think about, because it's not a good trend line.
Thank you, Rick. Laura Lee.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. Thank you for that question. And I think that already shows how much you're thinking about leadership and your own development. And it's a very personal journey. There are now some workshops and trainings that you can take, but when I started in leadership positions, I had 4 people under me, and I was 3 years out of law school. So I was a rookie, and I read a lot. But in reality, you learn a lot on the job. And I think, again, staying humble, having a lot of empathy for people around you is important. But it's a constant journey. You're always learning. Like, you never end up your career as a leader, right? And just because you have people in leadership positions doesn't mean they're really good leaders. But just knowing what you know and what you don't know and being transparent about it really, I think, will get people to follow you. And then the self-reflection, I mean, I think you always maintain self-control. We're humans, so we're going to feel anger and disappointment, right? But always taking time to reflect and cool off, cool down, and then come back when you are in a better frame of mind, I think is key. And I would just say to the last question, so I worked for both government and then the nonprofit advocacy sector, grassroots organizations, and I went back and forth, and we need more of that. We need people who are willing to go back and forth and never forget that the work that we're doing in government is for the people out there, right? And we also need people who have great ideas and know what things we're missing in government and take a chance and come work for government for a few years. Yeah.
Great leadership pearls. Dirk.
Last question then and answer, and I'll keep it brief. I agree with what you say about restraint, not acting emotionally and not acting impulsively. Passionate coolness, if you like. But what I want to focus on is the first question, and this is addressed then to students, obviously, what we can do here in the university environment. And it's to be, a good leader is always competent, is always on top of the issues, or lets themselves be advised by policy experts so that they are then on top of it. I learnt that skill working in the Cabinet Office many years ago when I wasn't much older than most of you, and I was taught how to write a briefing note, which is like a 2-page document with the executive summary, after having read the cabinet documents, which are that full, that thick, right? You've got to break it down for the minister because he hasn't got time or she hasn't got time to read all this stuff for you to break it. So, but you've got to be accurate, and the spelling has got to be there, and it's got to be on time. These are skills that we teach or impart with the papers that you write. Like, we are training you in competence for leadership. That's one issue. The other one is judgment. Judgment is not something that AI can teach you. AI is an information generating machine, right? But it won't tell you what to do. It'll give you options. So where are you going to learn judgment? You'll learn that by studying great leaders, for example, like reading Rick's book on Mandela or with Mandela, right? Or studying Lorelai's career. And you'll see why and when they made particular decisions, right? And you can maybe read Max Weber on his famous essay on leadership. The ethics of leadership is sometimes you need to make hard decisions where some people are going to suffer, but other people will benefit. I mean, there's a whole moral philosophy debate about that. But a lot of decisions won't be easy, but you have to accept responsibility and at times make sacrifices, like Mandela did when he spent 27 years in jail. So hopefully it doesn't come down to that with your lives, revolutionary moments against an apartheid regime. But judgment is something that you can learn at City College through our wonderful courses. And it's not something that technology can help you with.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Lorelei. Thank you, Rick. Everyone, please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists. And with that, I believe I have the privilege of handing it over to our amazing president, Vince Boudreau, to close us out. Thank you.
Please thank the panel one more time. Really blessed to have them and the Attorney General together in I'm not sure if it's a double bill or a quadruple bill, whatever you would call it. Years ago, when we were setting up the Colin Powell School, some of you may know, we started life as a center, pretty small. In fact, it was entirely contained in Shepherd 154 for the first couple of years I was the director of that one room. And look at you now. But when we sat down to talk about the School of Civic and Global Leadership, General Powell was very explicit that leadership had to be there. It wasn't, I would, he'd say, well, what's the curriculum? We'd say, it's the social sciences. And he'd say, I don't believe in the social sciences. It has to be leadership. That's what we want. We want to build leaders. And I was skeptical of the concept of, how do you teach leadership? And he said, and it echoes some of what you heard today, leadership is, the idea of leadership is, in my view, he said, pretty easy. Have a vision, communicate it clearly, assign responsibility, hold people accountable, assess and revise. If you can do all of those things, you will have a successful leadership career. So what did you see today? You saw the Attorney General really heavy on a vision of what her leadership would bring. You know, if you listen to what the idea of America that lay behind almost everything she talked about, you know, as they used to say on AM radio, the kids will dance to it, right? And then you had a very thoughtful conversation that really focused on what do you do with that vision? How do you implement it? I will tell you that there was nothing in my academic career, not a thing, that prepared me to think about how you manage a project or implement a project. The academic training that most of us get is very, very individual. Like, how do you develop your class, your lesson plan? How do you develop your research? You may be in a lab group, right? But the idea of managing a project, it's alien, or had been alien, to our education. And so what I really want to highlight is those of you that are here today, and those of you that are in the Colin Powell School, are benefiting tremendously from something that used to only exist really in MBA programs and business programs, which is a thoughtful, explicit conversation about how you take whatever dream it is that motivates you, whatever vision of a better world that you bring into your life and into your classroom and into your career, and how do you take it from the capacity to admire, you know, maybe a problem, maybe your idea of what a solution to that problem might look like, and implement it. And for that, we have, you know, a lot of people to thank. The leadership of the Colin Powell School, the people that are here, Dave Chotsky, who is the inaugural professor of leadership, the faculty and the leaders in residence who are explicitly brought into this institution because they've done things out in the world successfully, and they're bringing those insights into opportunities for you to think in a really determined fashion about what leadership means. And of course, Cy and Lori Sternberg, who both in endowing this lecture, so every year we get an opportunity to come together and through a different lens examine leadership, and their endowment of the inaugural Sternberg Family Leadership professor at City College. We never had a professor who was specifically devoted to teaching the topic of leadership to our students. And so you have an opportunity because of the tremendous generosity and insight and capacity of the Sternbergs, of the leaders of the school, of the leaders in residence that we bring in, to think explicitly about leadership. And I've always thought that if you can get somebody at a young age to do something that I never did at a young age, which is to think explicitly about what leadership means to me and how I develop the skills of leadership, you're already ahead of the game. So thank you very much for your wise support for this program, for the wise leadership of the school, for your insightful comments in today's talk, and for all of you for coming to the Sternberg Family Lecture in Leadership. Thank you, everybody. And we're wrapped.